Hey, well, welcome to another daily devotional. We are in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. So again, just to kind of remember the context that this is written in, Paul, an apostle of God, is writing a letter to the church in Corinth. And at this time, the apostles were kind of the ones in charge of the church, kind of keep everything, trying to keep the drama under control, keep everyone on the right track, chasing after Jesus. Because at this point, Jesus had walked the earth for 33 years. He is no longer with them, and now everyone is trying to live out a life pleasing to Jesus, following Jesus without Jesus, and trying to figure out what that looks like. And so the apostles are kind of trying to help everyone visualize what that's supposed to be like. And so in this, the church in Corinth was getting really, really messed up. And there was all kinds of stuff that happened. We read in 1 Corinthians about a man that was now living with his stepmother and all this kind of weird stuff that was just absolutely sinful and horrible within the church. And you have to remember that in the New Testament, there was a clear distinction between the church and not the church. Much in some ways that maybe the future may look like that in certain countries, that when you make a clear distinction to say, I am a Christian, there is a complete and total change from being a non-Christian. I think of people in the Middle East, when you change from saying, I'm no longer going to be part of Islam, and I'm going to become a Christian, absolutely everything changes in your life. There's a huge drastic change that happens, and now you're considered a Christian, which for them means that has all kinds of implications in certain countries in the Middle East. But here in the New Testament, in the same way, when they said that they were a Christian, they were following Jesus, there was this drastic thing to become part of the church. And so there was this group of people that were drastically following Jesus. And Paul is now saying, okay, there's some of you that are saying you're Christians, that you're following Jesus, and it is absolutely horrible. And Paul was actually going to visit them and talk to them, but he writes in these first 4 chapters that, you know what, I can't visit you, because if I visit you, I'm going to be so depressed and so discouraged. And it says, if I go to you, I'm going to be grieved, and who's going to cheer me up? Literally just leaving an open-ended question saying nobody's going to cheer me up. So instead, I'm writing you this letter. So I don't come and maybe have a blow up or have crazy grievance, but instead I'm going to write this letter to you. And so as he's writing this letter, he then begins to bring up in kind of verses 5 through 11 and even on further, he begins to talk about, again, someone that is doing something crazy within the church, absolutely sinful, horrible, all of these things. And the church had put them under discipline in some sense. We don't know what that was, but the church had confronted the person, they had exposed the sin, all of these things. And so there had been this person that had sinned is now grieving because their sin is out in the open and they were under discipline within the church and all these different things are happening. And so now Paul begins to kind of lay out what happens when someone has a failure that affects the whole church. Okay, so he says, you're put under discipline. There is something that the church steps in, leadership steps in and kind of walks through this. But then he begins to talk about a restoration process. And now he says, the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient. Shame, guilt, all of those things, that's sufficient. We don't need to keep, punishing this person. And he warns that if you keep doing that, in verse 11 says, in order that Satan might not outwit us. Right, that we don't want this person to actually go over to the other side, so to speak, or end their life, or who knows, something crazy like that. But it says in verse 17, it says this, now instead we ought to forgive and comfort him so that he will not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. I urge you, therefore, to reaffirm your love for him. Another reason I wrote to you was to see if you would stand the test and be obedient in everything. That he's saying that even in this situation where it's hard to love somebody, you just want to judge them and they clearly did do something wrong. You're not saying anything false when you say they did something wrong. You're completely being honest about it, and you're not lying. You're not, being slandering. You're just simply saying the facts. Hey, you did this. You messed up. That's what happened. There comes a point where we have to stop doing that and say, okay, we need to love this person and reaffirm them and forgive them so they can become part of the church. So Paul is walking them through this process of, okay, everything's going crazy in the church right now. We need to love one another now and begin to restore people back to the church church in a loving way, because if we completely judge one another, push one another out, that things are going to remain messed up. So Paul is now beyond frustrated with the sin that is happening, but in the same way, he is also frustrated with the way people are handling those that sinned. So when people around us have sinned and there's some issues going on, sure, there's going to be a season where they're going to have to be disciplined by God and these different things, but our role as the church is to love them, to forgive them, and allow them to enter back into the family of Christ. So I encourage you today, in every relationship that you're a part of, maybe people around you clearly have failed, they clearly have messed up, but instead of being, the bearer of bad news, let's be people that love one another, that help reconcile people back to the Lord. So we love you guys, and we will see you on Monday for 2 Corinthians chapter 3.